Cabernet Sauvignon. It is the most important grape on the left bank of Bordeaux in France, and so many of the most famous wines in the world want to replicate the success of left bank Bordeaux. Not knowing that left bank Bordeaux is Cabernet dominant is a telltale sign that you don't really know very much about wine. So it's a really crucial grape to get to grips with if you are wanting to sound like you know what you're on about. But it's not just Bordeaux that does make this special wine. It's a really important grape internationally and one of the most grown in the entire world. So let's get exploring. So where is it grown? Well, much like Chardonnay in the world of white grapes, Cabernet is grown in pretty much every single country that produces wine in the entire world. Because of that, we have Cabernets from cooler climates, we have moderate climates, and we have right through to really, really hot climate areas attempting to produce Cabernet Sauvignon. Its origin is on the west coast of France, and it's sort of still the most popular part of the world to produce this style. Certainly within Europe and probably in the world, Bordeaux is where Cabernet Sauvignon is most famous. Within Bordeaux, there are three broad regions. And if you imagine the rivers a little bit like a wishbone, you have the left bank of the river, the right bank of the river, and then the bottom where these two rivers combine to one larger river called Entre deux Mers, between two seas. So you can see my sort of wishbone shape here with the three sides of the rivers. Cabernet is king on the left side of the river. A Merlot and a grape variety called Cabernet Franc play supporting roles, along with some others, like Petit Verdot, for example. When you go to the right bank of Bordeaux, that flips around, and Merlot is the most popular and widely planted and prolific grape variety. So do not confuse the two. The left side, where Cabernet is king, is also often referred to as the Medoc. So if you hear left bank Bordeaux or Medoc, they're talking largely about the same thing. Cabernet from the left, the Medoc, makes very famous wines from specific appellations. And those are things like Margaux, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, and you may have heard about these or seen them on labels. These famous areas are where something called the growth system features, and you'll hear people talk about first growth, second growth, and so on. But more on that another time because, wow, it's a minefield. But here in Bordeaux, it's the producers that get given growth status rather than the region itself. It's also worth saying that not all Cabernet from Bordeaux or even from the left bank of Bordeaux is fine wine. And far from it. Bordeaux produces anything from €1 a bottle wine right through to bottles that cost tens of thousands of euros. Elsewhere around the world, well, the most famous comes from California, and in particular the Napa Valley, where cult Cabernet Sauvignons can fetch the same price as some of the fine wines in Bordeaux. It is grown all over California. Cabernet Sauvignon in California are great bedfellows, but a lot of it, much like Bordeaux, can be cheap and cheerful, right through to medium or super, super premium. So in a way, Bordeaux and Napa are quite similar in that respect. Cabernet does need a warming sun to ripen. So whilst people are experimenting with it in places like Germany and the UK, it is European countries more like Spain and Italy that are going to produce large volumes of very affordable Cabernet outside of France. And in fact, Italy is quite interesting because there's a movement called the Super Tuscans in Tuscany, and they often use Cabernet Sauvignon blended with the more traditional Tuscan grapes. And these wines have become very, 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 very famous over the past few decades, and they can make some very fine wines. Apart from these Super Tuscans, which are a little sneakier, you're really more likely to see Cabernet on the label of wines produced at volume in Italy, Spain, etc. They make fruity, pretty uninteresting but very gluggable wine, basically great for big groups. You will also find Cabernet Sauvignon outside of Europe in other US states. So Washington State is great. Other places like Australia can be the good, the bad and the ugly. Although for my mind, the finest come from a place called Margaret River. Beyond that, in Australia, look out for the Clare Valley and Barossa. They're fantastic too. Argentina, where this particular wine comes from, is also a great place for growing Cabernet. And although you might associate it with Malbec, they produce some absolutely cracking Cabernet Sauvignon. Chile, where in the Napa Valley the best styles come from, is a great affordable option for Cabernet. Uruguay, that's a fun one to try. They're quite hard to get hold of, but give it a go if you see one. South Africa, the most famous come from Stellenbosch, and they tend to be very rich and unctuous. And New Zealand, the finest in New Zealand will come from a place called Hawke's Bay. In fact, even now China give making Cabernet Sauvignon a stab. So like I said, you really can find Cabernet absolutely everywhere. So if you see it, give it a try. So what does Cabernet Sauvignon taste like? Well, the structure of Cabernet is often what sets it apart from many other red grapes. It's got these incredible high tannins, so the tannins being the bit that dry your mouth out. And they're considered to be very good quality tannins. Not all tannins are born equal. So they're quite chalky sometimes, they're velvety sometimes, but they're really very rarely harsh unless you've got a pretty low quality Cabernet Sauvignon. High acidity is also another hallmark. So balancing the high acid with the high acidity, i.e. the refreshingness within the mouth, means that there's great structure, and it's a beautiful balancing act you get with Cabernet Sauvignon, which is why people absolutely adore it. In terms of the fruit profile, black fruit definitely dominates. You can get red fruits in your Cabernets too, but black fruits like currants and berries are very prevalent. The more moderate climates will have softer currants, cherries, and once you get to the hot climates, those currants and berries might seem a little bit like they're oozing out of a crumble rather than picking them fresh off a tree. So whilst you have the same spectrum of fruit and it's pretty varied, the style of that fruit can be very, very different depending on the warmth of the region. Cooler climates also add another interesting hallmark, which is a green bell pepper character. It's a character you also find in Sauvignon Blanc, in the whites, and in red grape Cabernet Franc. And it's not surprising because those three grapes are actually all related to each other. It's got this sort of, green bell pepper, almost spicy feeling to it sometimes. And other cool climates sort of styles can be things like violets, and also, as they age, some amazing tobacco. Some other things you might pick up, just throwing out there, are things like licorice, which is absolutely delicious. And if that can often occur if the wine's had some oak, but also if it's had lashings and lashings of oak. Some of my absolute favourite things. European oak will give you cigar box, cedarwood, tobacco, maybe a bit of smoke. Honestly, it can smell a little bit like a gentleman's club or an old library, which is amazing. Whereas younger and more showy, perhaps, non-European and American oak styles are much more the fresh fruit pie. So you've got your baking spices like vanilla alongside your lashings of warmer fruit. Both are absolutely delicious, but my goodness, are they different. Cabernet is also famous for being a grape that ages well. And that's what makes it particularly desirable for collectors. So you can cellar it and it can become more and more complex as it ages. You might get leather, saddles, forest floor. There's loads of really fun words used to describe old Cabernet Sauvignon. If you want to have a little chuckle, read some tasting notes of some very, very old Bordeaux. My goodness, they can be creative. So, when should you drink it? Well, the naturally high acid and high tannin structure means that basically avoid salads at all costs. That body and that richness should be matched. And actually, high protein and high salt foods can tend to be a really big win overall with Cabernets. Younger cabs, so 10 years or under, tend to work really well with burgers, steaks, roast meats, hard cheeses. I love it with a big bean chili. You know, lots and lots of texture, and it's amazing. But also be careful when you're pairing those older Cabernet wines. Their tannins will have softened with age, their flavours will evolve. Traditionally, everyone says, oh, roast beef in an old Bordeaux is delicious, but I actually think roast lamb is better with an older vintage, particularly when you have your lamb in lots of herbs. It can be quite a gamey meat, and so can your wine, herbaceous, leathery. But also the other thing about roast beef for me is that I love to slather it in horseradish and mustard. And if you've got a really expensive old bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon that has evolved and is absolutely beautiful, maybe don't want to destroy it with very punchy horseradish. In general, Bordeaux is often a safer bet with an older British audience because they've grown up on it. It's the wine of the British, really. But please do try different Cabernets from different countries. What are the top tips for Cabernet Sauvignon? Number one, Cabernet Sauvignon from warm countries can actually be quite high in alcohol, and high alcohol wines are increasingly unpopular with younger drinkers. So try to avoid your 15% wines if you're buying for a younger drinker or an alcohol conscious drinker. 12.5%, 13% Bordeaux are sort of a thing of the past with climate change, but you can still try for something lower than 15. Number two, there's a very famous blind tasting from 1976 called The Judgment of Paris. And it was essentially a tasting of Bordeaux Reds and Cabernet Sauvignons from California, as well as Burgundian Chardonnay and Californian Chardonnay. It was a huge hoo-ha at the time because the USA won on both, despite the panel sort of being rigged towards the Europeans with British and French tasters. Wine geeks will often refer to it, and it's a really, really good thing to know about. And if you haven't got time to do loads of reading, why not nestle up with the film Bottle Shock, and you can learn a little bit more. Number three, Cabernet Sauvignon is the way we would describe it in British, but Cab and Cab Sav is a very American term. So if somebody's saying Cab, they mean Cabernet Sauvignon, not Cabernet Franc. 4, remember that not all Bordeaux is dominant Cabernet Sauvignon. Do not fall into the trap and sound stupid. 5, if you're looking for somewhere else to try Cabernet Sauvignon that is not Bordeaux and is not the USA, I would opt for Margaret River if you want something really fancy and absolutely delicious, and that's in Australia on the west coast, or Stellenbosch in South Africa, where the quality is just going up and up and up, and the prices are pretty stable. So I'm going to go with my Argentinian version now, and I'm going to go and enjoy it with a piece of dark chocolate.